Tourette's podcast is not a medical advice show. It's a show about experiences. In the course of that, we may talk about medications or therapies or stories from the doctor's office, but don't mistake any of that for medical advice or direction. It's not. Get that only from people or places licensed or certified to give it, not from a massively fun and action-packed podcast about our life experiences, such as...
Many could actually pinpoint the day their tics started. They say, my tics started on December 1st. And they became so severe and incapacitating that by December 3rd, I was in the emergency room with severe motor tics and severe vocal tics. A lot of random words, and many of the words were the same. Many of the words were the same in people who did not know each other.
Both tic-like behaviors and tics are aggravated and precipitated by psychosocial stressors. So that is definitely has been an environmental trigger.
This is Tourette's podcast, made possible with support of the Tourette Association of America and part of the Geeks Rising Network. Welcome to the show. This is Ben. This is the podcast where I, someone with Tourette syndrome, talks to someone else out there in the world who also has Tourette syndrome so we can put our notes together with the listening audience and see what amazing stuff we didn't know we had in common and what we're able to learn from our very personal experiences with Tourette syndrome. However, on this episode, we're going to do something different. Every podcaster says deep dive. I'm going to say on this episode, we're investigating something that's been up lately, really since the start of the pandemic, and that's this phenomenon that's been playing out mostly through social media on the app TikTok, one of the most popular apps in the world. If you're not familiar, despite its name, it has nothing to do with Tourette syndrome. It's like an app where you can make and share these short form videos with your followers. A lot of people use it to make comedy videos, dance videos. A lot of people use it to educate and display maybe underappreciated parts of our lives. So people making videos and sharing them via TikTok. But one strange thing that's been happening is ever since the pandemic hit, and we exponentially increased our screen time, lots and lots of young people, young women in particular, have been showing up to the doctor with this sudden and often dynamic ticking, like Tourette syndrome, but out of nowhere, like with no case history or anything like that. Young people watching Tourette videos on TikTok and then coming away with what appears to be Tourette syndrome, like what they were just watching on TikTok. Almost like they're watching it and they're infected by the video. Tourette is not an infectious disease. I'm just using that kind of colloquially. So they watch the TikTok video, they come away with tics. And even some of the same tics between people who've never met each other before. Some of the same tics, like specific tics. So what's happening? Like, this out of nowhere tic disorder that seems influenced or triggered or prompted by the Tourette content on TikTok. Like, what is happening? So we're going to investigate this today with a pair of scientists who've been looking at it and just released some observations. So that's today on Tourette's podcast. Lots of talk in the Tourette community about this. I've heard a mix of thoughts about what's going on. This is an interesting episode, and that's coming right up. Okay, so last week, I uploaded episode 3 of season 7 with a fantastic guest named John L. That was last week. Really cool story with a really driven person. But before John L's part of the episode, when I initially uploaded it so you guys could listen, it included a sensitive question from a parent, like a listener question, that I tried my best to answer. But like 15 or 20 minutes after I uploaded the episode, I took it down. I deleted that part of it with the listener question. And then I re-uploaded it about 20 minutes later without that question. Or without me answering it. And the reason is, I was listening to my answer to this parent, and I was thinking to myself, like, why am I speaking on this? It's a question about parenthood. I'm not a parent. I'm talking all this positive stuff, but, for this question, I was totally out of my depth and was like, wait, I don't know what I'm talking about. So I stripped that part out and instead posted that question to the Tourette's podcast discussion group on Facebook to get some qualified answers there from more qualified people, i.e. parents. So anyway, here's the question. Hey, Ben, I'm the mother of a 13-year-old with Tourette syndrome. He was diagnosed last year, and it's been very difficult on us. I'm trying to be there for him in every way, but some days nothing seems to help, and I feel like I'm not enough as a mother. Listening to this podcast has made me feel so much better about the future. So what I'm wondering is if my experience is similar to what other parents go through with diagnosed teenagers. If the experience is different, do they still feel as helpless as I do? So that's the question from a mother of a 13-year-old with Tourette who's having a hard time. So I asked some parents in the discussion group what they thought about it, and a member named Diana says, quote, "My daughter had a sudden, rapid onset at 13. She'll be 15 soon. It's been hard. I keep telling myself that the teen years would still be difficult, even in the best of times. Hormones, brain changes, awkwardness, identity crisis. On top of tics, anxiety, depression, OCD, and a bloody pandemic. Just gotta hang in there. I keep telling her she's got to hang in there because nothing stays the same forever. And they won't be teens forever, thank goodness. And you are enough. Don't beat yourself up. These are hard times all around." End quote. And that's from a parent named Diana. Another parent named Jerry says, quote, "Yes, my daughter was diagnosed with Tourette's at 13, and her tics were really disabling. It was heart-wrenching. This podcast was the first thing to bring me hope. Since then, she is 17 now. We have gotten so many more hopeful moments. In fact, my daughter is now mentoring her friend who was just diagnosed. She is able to share her story in a way that makes me so proud." End quote from a parent named Jerry. I think those are two solid answers. If you're listening to this and you have additional thoughts, that question is still posted in the Facebook group where we've got hundreds and hundreds of active members. You can also write me directly through the contact form at tourettespodcast.com. All right, we're in the middle of Tourette Awareness Month every year, May 15th through June 15th. And I would like to thank everybody who's been sharing their authentic story of Tourette syndrome and the people who help to facilitate our storytelling, including the Tourette Association of America, sponsor of this podcast, at tourette.org. That's tourette.org, where they have all kinds of ways to express Awareness Month. You can also find free webinars at tourette.org. A couple coming up are Advances in the Treatment of Tics, that's June 10th, and Transitioning to Adult Care, that's July 13th. And there are other webinars in between and after, and you can also find all the past webinars that have already happened about Tourette syndrome for kids, adults, parents, and providers at tourette.org. All right, science time. Our guests are Dr. Tamara Pringsheim and Davide Martino, both of the University of Calgary in Canada. I'm stoked to bring on more scientists. We've had some on in the past, but I like the idea of making their names more familiar to the Tourette community. Because we can help one another, we can learn from one another and appreciate one another. We're all talking about the same thing, being Tourette syndrome or tic disorders or movement disorders, and it makes sense to hang out together, I think. So, picking up from the setup I gave at the start of the episode, what's up with teenagers watching Tourette syndrome videos on TikTok and then coming away with what looks like a serious case of Tourette syndrome where no symptoms existed before? Are they faking? Are they just mimicking for attention? Maybe they're not faking it. Maybe something else is going on. Why would this be happening? Let's introduce the doctors. Just for the record, to get this part right, could you each identify yourselves and the part of the world you live in, and your titles or kind of work you do, just how you would introduce yourself to this audience?
Oh, okay, sure. I'm Tamara Pringsheim. I'm a neurologist in the Department of Clinical Neurosciences at the University of Calgary. I run the Tourette Syndrome Clinic at the Alberta Children's Hospital. I opened the clinic in 2008. I also see adults with Tourette syndrome and other movement disorders at the Adult Movement Disorders Clinic at the Foothills Medical Center.
Okay. Dr. Martino?
I am Davide Martino. I am, like Dr. Pringsheim, a neurologist at the Department of Clinical Neurosciences at the University of Calgary. I am the director of the Adult Movement Disorders program of the department. And I'm also working at the Tourette and Pediatric Movement Disorders program led by Dr. Pringsheim at the Alberta Children's Hospital in Calgary. And definitely tic disorders and Tourette syndrome are one of my main areas of clinical and research interest. and they've been for 15 years and more, probably.
Your latest work is really timely and really important, looking at the intersection of social media and TikTok and influence. Can you give us some context and paint a picture of what caught your attention with this? Like, what was happening that led to this kind of study, just so anybody who doesn't know what we're talking about can kind of catch up?
Yeah, okay. Well, I guess it started in the midst of the pandemic, towards the end of the summer, actually, probably August, September. We started seeing the first one or two girls who did not come to with a history of tic disorders before, and started having manifesting these very complex and disabling behaviors that were very, very similar to tics, but their development, their history was very unusual. They just started almost out of the blue and picked up in a matter of few days to become a significantly incapacitating tic disorder or tic-like disorder. So, and then Dr. Pringsheim and I were actually sharing the same experience independently, seeing these new patients, new referrals. Then a colleague of ours at the Children's Hospital called us one day, and because she had been seeing exactly the same type of patient in the emergency department of the Alberta Children's Hospital. And within a matter of probably 3-4 weeks, we just realized that something was going on here, because this was totally unprecedented. We never really experienced such a cluster of very similar kids who presented in a very similar way with a disorder.
So this is young people out of nowhere, just all of a sudden, tic-like symptoms, and they're showing up, and they're like, "What's going on?" And it's so debilitating in some cases that you said that's it's really life impacting.
Yes, it's definitely what we were seeing. Definitely, what was appearing in front of our eyes was something that, brought in a normal, natural social context, would be very debilitating for any individual, because these girls were having these tics very, very loud and very, very violent in a way, from point of view of the amplitude of the movements, and therefore very pervasive. They were basically incapacitated of conducting a normal communication or normal type of social interaction, at least in front of us. And this was also a red flag, because typically with people with classic developmental tics, we see quite the opposite. And once they enter our office, they get better. Their tics are not so obvious, and we have to really struggle or interview very carefully with them and with the families to try and figure out the true impact that tics have in their daily life. But when these girls came to our attention, they were clearly incapacitated from the first second that we started seeing them, and that's in itself is not typical.
Huh. Okay. So, where did this lead you in terms of like, this is something we have to study? Like, what were some of the initial thoughts of maybe what was going on?
Well, we started noting that these patients were happening, and then we decided, first of all, to look into whether we could confirm that indeed what was our impression was truly the case, that these patients were different from the typical tic disorders patients. And this is where Dr. Pringsheim's work in the movement disorders program and the creation of a registry has helped. And I would like Dr. Pringsheim to comment on this.
Yeah, I'd love to hear about the registry and where all this went.
Yeah, so we developed a registry at the Tourette Syndrome Clinic back in 2010. And in this tic disorder registry, all children at their first visit in the clinic we do sort of extensive clinical phenotyping with the goal of trying to understand long-term trajectories and who is more likely to have an improvement of their tics with time and who is more likely to persist. With the thought that if I knew in a 10-year-old if their tics were more likely to get better or not, if they had those characteristics that suggested persistence into adulthood, I would intervene more intensely in the young person. So it's a long-term study. Every new patient is asked if they would like to join the registry. And so we're collecting sort of their tic severity at baseline. We have the full tic inventory, as well as the measurement of frequency, intensity, interference, etc. We do the Yale-Brown obsessive compulsive checklist to understand their obsessive compulsive behaviors. We do the Conners-3, which is a measure of ADHD symptoms. We do the multidimensional anxiety scale in children, which is a measure of anxiety. And we do the child depression inventory, which is a measure of depressive symptoms. We also include other baseline data, such as, the age of onset, the medications that the child is taking. We record the official diagnoses that they have as well. And so we have now more than 300 children in the registry. And so we have a very clear profile of the children that are seen in the clinic at their first visit. So I could tell you that, the average age of a child when they're first seen in our clinic is 10. I can tell you that 80% of them are boys. I can tell you that the mean age of tic onset in that sample is 6. I can tell you that 45% of them have ADHD. About 20% of them have an anxiety disorder. About 25% have OCD, and about 8% have depression. So this is sort of it gives you a data of gives you a look at the data of the average child that is seen in the clinic. So when all these different children with different manifestations came in, we were able to...
Yeah, and you said mostly boys too, right? Like 80% boys is what you were seeing in the registry before, correct. And now it's young women presenting.
That's right. And much older. So we were able to make comparisons between the children in our registry and this group of new tic symptoms. And we found that they were significantly older. So the age of onset was 13 or 14 years compared to 6 years of age. They were much more likely to have a diagnosis of depression. They were more likely to have anxiety. They are much more likely to be female. I think nearly everyone we've seen, with the exception of, 2 people, have been female. And as Dr. Martino was describing, the type of tics that these young people are having were very different from what we see traditionally in the clinic. So usually young children present with facial tics, and tics demonstrate this rostrocaudal progression over time. So one of the most common stories I get in my clinic is, when this child was 4, he started blinking frequently. We actually thought there was something wrong with his eyes. So we went to the optometrist. We thought the eyes were dry, but the optometrist said, no, eyes are fine. And then that went away. And then he started wrinkling his nose, or he started clearing his throat. So often it's sort of one tic at a time, centered on the face or the neck and shoulders. And then that tic resolves and a new tic comes. Vocal tics typically start after motor tics. And then we reach a peak in severity between 10 and 12. And then we see improvement between 14 and 17. And so the people who are coming in were starting anywhere between 12 and 25 years. And many could actually pinpoint the day their tics started. They say, my tics started on December 1st. And they became so severe and so incapacitating that by December 3rd, I was in the emergency room with severe motor tics and severe vocal tics. And many of the motor tics were large amplitude arm movements. So we saw a lot of chest thumping, thigh banging, hitting of the head, touching of parents. We saw a lot of coprolalia. A lot of the coprolalia fixated on sexual things. A lot of random words, and many of the words were the same. Many of the words were the same in people who did not know each other.
Really?
Yeah. And so this really suggested to us that there was a common model. When, I've been working with people with Tourette syndrome since 1998. And I never saw a single person who said the word beans. Yeah. And then I saw
beans.
Yeah. And then I saw 20 people in the span of 4 months that are all saying the word beans. Right.
So where's that coming from? I mean, that shows some kind of common denominator. Yeah. What do you do with that?
Well, we know where it's coming from. We know that it's coming from someone on social media who frequently says the word beans. So that's when we need to talk about it with the patient and about the importance of this modeling. Right. And how it can be triggering for people.
Right.
Yeah. But that's that was the major clue.
This is when we started asking our patients whether they knew anyone who on social media was exhibiting through videos or through various types of accounts, but usually videos with sound. Their tics, and so it became quite quick. It was actually quite quick to get back to, I would say, 2 or 3 major personalities, but who were pretty known by, I would say, the vast majority of our patients. Not all of them, but definitely the vast majority. So the model was there, and it's and we believe it has had an influence in this.
Wow. So that's so amazing that, there's a social media personality that seems to be kind of the hub in terms of, I'm using this word very colloquially when I say something like infection. It's something that people say in the Tourette community where it's like, Tourette is contagious if you already have it, where people can kind of pass tics back and forth. And I've heard about at Tourette's camp, like a single word or a single kind of tic being kind of passed around the group, and but
it's a different phenomenon though compared to what happens in Tourette.
Yeah,
because in Tourette it's quite instantaneous. So you have a group of people who are with tics, and this kind of contagion begins immediately, and you can have echo phenomena happening on the spot. This is it's different from the typical echo phenomena that we see in Tourette. It's a more delayed process because it doesn't, and it probably requires and sticks more. It requires probably a longer exposure, processing by the brain, and then it develops. So it is not the same as echoing. Echoing is really instantaneous, and we've all experienced this with people with tics, and in gatherings and the patient advocacy groups meetings. That's very common.
Yeah,
but it may not necessarily stick after the end of the meeting. It may just be last the duration of the meeting. This is different.
So are we talking about this? So is this kind of being written down as different from Tourette syndrome? Like, where does this, like, we have the definition of Tourette syndrome and all the dialogue around it. Where does this kind of fit in? Is this being kind of looked at in a similar way, or is this just something new that you're having to kind of wall off and say, what is this individual thing we're looking at?
This is not an entirely new phenomenon. I mean, we call this tick-like behavior or tick-like behaviors, and we believe that they belong to the spectrum of functional neurological disorders or symptoms, which is a specific condition in neurology whereby behavior is brought on that mimics and imitates an abnormal behavior that belongs to a specific neurological or medical condition. It is acted out by the individual in a way that it's not perceived as being voluntary or controllable, out of control, but it does have all the physical characteristics of a voluntary motion or voluntary movements or voluntary behavior, even though not perceived as such. And
gotcha.
And in the past, this type of cases were trickling in very sporadically and intermittently, and relatively rarely. Even in the context of functional neurological disorders, tick-like behaviors are not that common, and mostly seen in people who already have Tourette syndrome and also exhibit some of these more unusual and atypical tick-like behaviors. An analogy to this in neurology is epilepsy. People may have seizures, but may also have functional non-epileptic seizures. And right. The same thing happens in Tourette syndrome. But we've also seen people coming in the past intermittently with these functional tick-like behaviors. We never experienced such a clustering in time and such a similarity and homogeneity in presentation, because all in the past functional tick-like behaviors were all different from each other. These are all similar to each other.
So are there other common denominators that are starting to come out, or why does social media and TikTok, why does this seem to be so operative and triggering?
I think we can both say answer. Something about this. Well, I think why now? I mean, it's hard to separate it from the pandemic, right? I think that the psychosocial effects of the pandemic are enormous, especially on young people, right? I think in many places there's been prolonged pandemic lockdowns. The opportunities for social interactions are quite limited. In many places you can't go to inside your friend's house. Sports are canceled. So I think a lot of the social outlets that people had are just not as easily accessed as they were prior to the pandemic, and that people are lonely and looking for connection, and many of them are connecting using social media. And so I think we know that there was an increase in social media use over the course of the pandemic. The number of active TikTok users grew enormously between January of 2020 and January of 2021. So I think I don't know if this would have happened if it was just TikTok and no pandemic. I think the pandemic was key, right? Go ahead.
I mean these personalities on we say TikTok because that's probably the social media that has these personalities have YouTube channels. They use Instagram, so I don't want to demonize TikTok specifically. And also,
right,
the name TikTok also clearly very evocative of ticks, and
very home court sounding
connection in the name, but that sticks easier. But But nevertheless, I mean, these personalities were active and had already posted a lot of videos before the peak of the pandemic. It's just that, as Dr. Pringsheim was saying, the usage of social media has changed. Even though we don't have very strong data yet, but I'm expecting statistical data coming up anytime soon to show that there has been a substantial change in the type of usage of social media, which have already showed a trend of increased frequency of use and type of usage over the last 5 to 6 years on a steady 10-20% increase year after year. But definitely the pandemic has accelerated this. And in addition to the simple use of social media, the social distress related to living in the pandemic for a teenager has been, I think, well, we'll now see a lot of commentaries and even some good scientific evidence of this is starting to come out. But the toll that the teenagers have paid so far has been much bigger than what the news broadcasters have said. Obviously, in the pandemic, we focused on elderly people, quite rightly so, given that they were the ones who were dying. And
right.
But the quality of life has been tremendously impacted on teenagers, and we will have to work on this to mitigate the damage and prevent any kind of escalation. And so social distress has been important, and both tick-like behaviors and tics are aggravated and precipitated by psychosocial stressors. So that is definitely has been an environmental trigger that is very important to mention. The combination of these things has been important in generating this escalation of cases, in our opinion.
So what's the thought on, say, like mechanism? Like, why does this affect some people and not others? As far as you can tell, it seems to be mostly young women who are coming in with these symptoms. Like, what are the thoughts on sort of why are we seeing what we're seeing?
Well, I mean, there's no doubt that the incredible female predominance. I mean, it cannot be just disregarded as coincidental. This is relevant, and to begin with, coming to the environmental triggers to begin with, the social personalities who have posted these videos are all females. So if we consider modeling as a mechanism or imitation, definitely that sort of explains in part why our patients are almost all females. Also, I should say that the way that these social personalities have presented their tics in their videos is also not typical. They certainly did this to advocate for tics, to raise tic awareness for very good intentions, and in many cases they have succeeded to raise awareness for sure. Particularly one British personality has become famous in a way, and this has raised awareness for tic disorders and Tourette syndrome in general. But also, I should say that if we look at her videos, they appear very, very at ease with their tics. They describe them, they present them, but they show a part of their life which is positive, charming, attractive, and overall, as Dr. Pringsheim mentions, often they seem to have kind of the time of their life, even though they are exhibiting tics. And so they look successful. And one wonders whether this particular message, the message of being successful and popular and nice and is somewhat tightly connected to their tics. And therefore, the question arises, are tics a source of popularity and success? Should we imitate them to be more successful socially? A colleague of ours from the US has even mentioned to us an instance in which kids have got together to talk about having tics. So that is concerning if you think about it, and it's a bit out of control. But also social anxiety, ability to social fitness, ability to perform successfully in a social context is something that we believe may be an important predisposing factor to develop this particular type of behavior. And both in the area of social anxiety and the area of social cognition, so the ability to process socially relevant stimuli, there is a female predisposition for some difficulties and challenges more than in males in the adolescence years. And that may also contribute to the vast female predominance that we've observed in our group of patients.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I guess the things that I would add would be that, the majority of young people that I've seen with this particular type of tic disorder have been, I'd say, socially anxious young women. So, these are not the captain of the cheerleading squad or, the extrovert who is so comfortable in her own skin. Right. These are
okay. This is one thing I was going to ask about is if, I know you're familiar with the Tourette iceberg. There's like the tics, but there are the other things that tend to come along, like anxiety and depression and things like that. So I was wondering if there was any sort of overlap with these women and kind of what they were experiencing in addition to ticking, or if that's been historical with them or what.
Yeah. So I'd say that, there are high rates of anxiety and depression in these young people. And particularly social anxiety, being very concerned about what others think of them. Did I do something that was embarrassing? About concerns about social acceptance. I think this has come up again and again in the interviews that I've done with young people. I found it very interesting, some of the responses to some of the TikTok videos. I have a 15-year-old daughter, and she's sort of monitoring what's going on TikTok for me. So she watches the videos and tells me. And she said the other day, she said that she was looking at the comments that people had made on a girl's tics, and many of them were, "Your tics are so cute. I wish I had tics." Which I thought was so interesting.
Interesting.
Right?
Yeah.
So
the imitative behavior is an important element here. And again, words matter, terminology is important. And I believe Dr. Pringsheim would agree with me that I am a little concerned of necessarily labeling easily these behaviors as tics.
Yeah.
That might generate the particularly in the people who are non-medical, the idea that these are just tics, and therefore they should respond to the treatments that we normally use with tics, which is in part true because we are trying to treat these patients using similar behavioral strategies that are being used for tics, but we can touch a little bit about this too. But certainly we try to avoid treating them with the classic anti-tic medications that we use for tics. And so also because we have started initially doing so and we haven't seen any good response, so we just stopped. And this is also the experience of other colleagues in other parts of the world who are seeing the same phenomenon.
Yeah.
So medications don't work, at least not the medications that we use to treat tics specifically, like antipsychotics or clonidine. And so,
interesting.
So we can't call them treatment-resistant tics, because that would be a problem. Also, because as you know, there may be also other therapeutic options, particularly for severe cases that are more invasive, and like even brain surgery, as this is definitely not the context in which we would ever discuss an option like that.
Sure. Yeah.
So, we are starting to see some people back who have gone through the comprehensive behavioral intervention for tics.
Okay.
And, completed the 8-week program and are reporting success. I saw someone yesterday who said they had a 75% improvement going through the comprehensive behavioral intervention for tics. I've had some success with treatment of anxiety. So whether that be through cognitive behavioral therapy or through the use of selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, I've had a number of children and young people improve with that sort of treatment plan as well. So, I always want to make sure that people know that, it doesn't matter to us whether the patient has tics or tic-like behaviors. We still want to help them, right? I say, you don't have Tourette syndrome.
Yeah, it's not like you don't count.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. While you don't have Tourette syndrome, I'm still going to be your doctor, and Dr. Martino is still going to be your doctor. We want to help you through this. We want to get you through this. We're going to be learning with you what the best way is to treat you, and what will take you back to how things were before. So.
The Tourette Association of America is the premier nonprofit working to raise awareness, advance research, and provide ongoing support to those with Tourette syndrome or tic disorder. With a network of over 130 chapters, support groups, and centers of excellence, the TAA engages with communities across the nation in an effort to provide tools, webinars, workshops, and support for all seeking assistance. As a primary sponsor of Tourette's podcast, the TAA supports the authentic conversations showcasing the diverse representation of the TS community. To learn more, visit tourette.org, TOURETTE.org. Yeah, so that's one thing that has me wondering. So whether we call them tics, and there may be imitation in there somewhere, but they still want help, so they're not. So it's not maybe fair to say they're faking it. What how do you kind of sort that out? How imitation and influence, if I have this right, can lead you to tic-like behavior that isn't quite ticking, and maybe imitation, but isn't quite faking either, because they want help. They want, to be restored to how they were before. Like, how do you kind of sort all that out? And do I have that wrong, or?
No. This is a very good question. And we were just looking at ourselves to see how we could answer this. But we do it. We obviously speak to them. And we obviously explain this. And but I think I should go back to the functional label, so to speak, that we. Definitely. That might be where I'm getting tripped up. I personally use this term. It's not a great term, and from a scientific point of view, it's actually a pretty sloppy term. But it's effective because it does point in the direction of something of a processing difficulty that has led to the development of this behavior. I normally talk about the ability of the brain to process and filter behaviors, and therefore that something's gone awry in this filter. So there's a stimulus, the brain processes it, guides towards the selection of an adequate motor response to a given stimulus, and something in this process is not functioning well, and so the individual starts manifesting a motor behavior that it's not adequate or useful to the context that the individual lives in. This is true for tremor, or shaking. This is true for pictures that look like Parkinson's disease, and it's true for pictures that look like tics. They're all functional neurological symptoms, and they're all eye condition. There are international foundations and societies that look after people with functional neurological disorders and foster research on this topic. This is very common in neurology. And so they're not faking it. We tell them very clearly that we don't believe that they are putting this on. We don't believe that this is something they are happy doing. They are satisfied or fulfilled by doing. We read into their distress and empathize with that, but clearly explain the concept of functional neurological symptoms as driving these tick-like behaviors. So
okay, so this is really good to know. Yeah, because I think I have heard, and seen little rumblings here and there in the community about people just all of a sudden performing tics and maybe trying to get attention for it, but it's not the case that they are faking it. That there's something real going on here that we need to empathize with, and they want help, and this is something very worthy of looking at.
If people tell, if a person tells another person, I wish I had your tics, or if kids get together and say, why don't we all have tics together? They clearly, that is a slightly different situation, but at the same time, it's a cry for help of some sort, because it's a cry for help to gain better social maturity, a better confidence on interacting socially, because tics have never been the bond towards socialization, and perhaps it might be useful if they don't become. That's my personal take, but there are trends, and there are so many tick-like habits and trends that we have seen in pop stars and that have been modeled, but the tics modeled like this, I don't believe they are modeled volitionally, voluntarily, and I don't think that they improve the quality of life and the functioning of the individuals who exhibit these tick-like behaviors. So they are incapacitating, and so they should reach medical attention, and they should receive medical treatment.
So where do we take it from here? This is a fairly if we're talking in the context of the pandemic and social media, this is a fairly fresh topic with, I'm sure all kinds of angles to pursue. What needs to be answered? What are the big questions that are right in front of you when it comes to this?
I think we need to figure out what the best treatment strategy is and how to make that available. I know our colleagues are in the same situation as we are here in Calgary. So, I can tell you that for the past 13 years, we've typically would get 5 new referrals a week. And, we have the services set up to meet that type of demand. Since January, we've been getting, closer to 17 referrals a week. And more than half have been for these young people with these sudden onset tick-like behaviors. And now we're needing a lot more support because we need the psychotherapist or the psychologist to be available to work with these young people, and the health systems, are unable to meet the demand. So we feel we're in a difficult place because the longer this goes on, I think the more difficult it is to stop it. So we need, like I said, we need to figure out what works and how to make it available. We are working with our colleagues in psychology to develop a group treatment program so that we could treat several youth simultaneously. that's one way of increasing our resources. So we're looking at doing something like that. Dr. Martino and I are working overtime to try and see everybody. We're doing all sorts of extra clinics to try and see these young people. So I think those are treatment priorities. We also want to understand better who is at risk for this type of disorder. I mean, as Dr. Martino mentioned, this is not the first time this has happened. There's I think it's the first time it's happened on a global scale because of TikTok. Right. But there were in 2012 there was an outbreak of what they eventually termed mass psychogenic illness in Leroy, New York, where I think there was, I don't remember how many there were, but I think upwards of 30 young people who developed tics.
Okay. So, and I've heard the term, and this may be a totally crude term, but I've read and listened to some like science podcasts on, quote unquote mass hysteria. And that, I mean, is that kind of in the, and again, this might be the totally wrong word to use for it, but I mean, is that kind of in the same neighborhood of what we're talking about, how something like that can get passed around in like a localized group? Or?
Yeah. So now they would use the term mass psychogenic illness.
Okay. So that's the right way to say it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Or a mass somatoform disorder. Right. That's what that would be the current terminology. But, these have been described for hundreds of years, where there be local pockets of behaviors that would arise within groups of people. And I just think that this is the first global manifestation of this. Right.
Wow.
So, so I mean, we're committed to trying to figure this out. We have a lot of empathy and sympathy for these young people. And I say to them, a 15-month pandemic is nothing when you're 50, but when you're 15, it's forever. It feels like forever. Mm-hmm. And they are distressed. And I think we can't pretend that our kids are all right because we know that they're not. We're doing everything we can to help them. And I want people to know that, that we're trying to figure this out for you. Yeah.
If I may add also, it is important, as you were mentioning, that if there's any underlying behavioral or psychopathological trait that we need to take care of and treat, besides the obviously the treatment that is targeting specifically the behaviors. Do they have an anxiety disorder? Do they have a mood disorder? Do we need to treat that as well, both with medications or with dedicated behavioral treatments that are generally addressing the social anxiety as opposed to the behavior specifically? So all these things are important, but we also need to understand a bit more of the characteristics of this population. So as Dr. Pringsheim was mentioning, we need to understand the true predisposing traits and states that increase the risk of developing this behavior, and only by pulling together, and putting together the efforts from different people, from different colleagues working across different parts of the world. And this is really our intention, to sort of create like an international registry that looks into the commonalities and the differences that may even exist across different countries, even though we are actually seeing mostly commonalities so far and little difference. But some colleagues have different takes and different views on the, for example, the impact of social media on this presentation. And we're discussing this. We're trying to share experiences objectively. And but as we said, I think this is a global phenomenon, and it's the first of its sort, at least in our very restricted field.
Yeah, and I guess, Ben, I I wonder if I could just suggest that, if there are any parents listening who have a child affected by this problem, that we do have some resources on our website. We have we have some webinars on like sort of explaining, why, how this is different from Tourette syndrome. Like, why is it not Tourette? And actually tomorrow night we have a webinar on the functional behavioral assessment and intervention, which we think is probably the key therapeutic approach that should be used in young people that have this problem. So our psychologist will be giving a webinar, and our webinars are recorded and they're posted on our website so they can be watched at any time. And so it's Tourette OCD Alberta Network.ca. And then there's
all one word?
Yeah. Yeah. I can send you a link. And then we have a page devoted to this topic so that, if parents want to, understand, have a deeper dive into it. We have those webinars that they can watch.
Yeah. Send me those links and I would love to get them up on the website. And I just really appreciate this because it's been, I think, kind of a mysterious talk lately with what I've been seeing online and questions I've been getting of like, have you seen this TikTok stuff? Like, what's your opinion on it? What do the scientists think? So,
and I've been worried about how my Tourette patients will feel about it. Right. That's been one of my worries is, are my Tourette patients going to feel like, are they going to be happy that, there's more awareness and acceptance, or are they going to feel like cultural appropriation? You know what I mean? Like, what's it going to go? I don't know. Like, I feel a bit nervous about it, and that I don't want my patients to feel like they're being made fun of, or that their culture is being stolen from. I don't know.
It's a very good point. I mean, good education, good and objective education of health professionals and patients and the public is essential here. I mean, we know that Tourette syndrome has always been represented and stigmatized in a slightly incorrect or inaccurate form. I'm thinking of the overemphasis on coprolalia that's always been around. To the point that people, the majority of people, think that if there's no coprolalia, there's no Tourette.
Yes.
This is still happening.
Yes.
And but we are gradually overcoming this misinformation by education, by communicating with the public and allowing health professionals and the public to come together to discuss and to sort of disseminate knowledge on this condition. The same thing we'll have to do for this, but this is why we are emphasizing so much and repeatedly that this is not Tourette syndrome, and it's something different. And so people with Tourette syndrome shouldn't feel that this situation is changing the focus, is changing the representation of what Tourette is, because this phenomenon is happening. This is a phenomenon that is in some way linked culturally to Tourette syndrome, but it's different from Tourette syndrome. So people with Tourette shouldn't feel abandoned, shouldn't feel misunderstood or misrepresented by this phenomenon, because at the end of the day, they don't have what these functional tic-like behaviors are. So they have a different condition. So they should consider themselves separate from this. Yeah. Empathy is always desirable from anyone towards anyone. Yeah. So, but no feeling of losing the identity, which is very important because it allows a good and healthy relationship between health professionals and patients, as well as within individuals in the public. that is not changing what we know about Tourette syndrome, what we are experiencing.
Right. So this isn't muddying the waters, and this is, there's something that, there's Tourette syndrome as defined, and who knows if the walls of that definition are gonna, move around someday, or if there's going to be a new name. I mean, there's been talk about, kind of giving a new moniker to Tourette syndrome to maybe catch a few other things, and but this is, I'm pretty proud of the empathy that I think the Tourette community itself demonstrates, just knowing what it's like to be misunderstood and trying to put themselves in the shoes of other people who, need the same shot at understanding. And I've heard, from people in the tic disorder community at large who don't exactly have Tourette syndrome, but have, another kind of tic disorder, and they've had self-consciousness about, well, I know it's not Tourette. I mean, but it's the same kind of life experience. They're living with tics, and these are people who, deserve all the same empathy and shot at improving their lives. And if there's something that's, no matter what you call it, if there's an issue that we want to get around, I'm all for doing it. And I think this is really fantastic work that you guys are doing, because it's helping the Tourette community understand, I think, maybe more about itself. And then, these other sort of neighboring things that are kind of in the same building are just so interesting. And hopefully, as we just continue gathering data and observations about all of this, that lifts all boats, and we end up having just a better understanding of our brains in general. I mean, I know I'm kind of talking very loosely right now, but I've been really interested in this topic ever since I first heard about it, and I'm really thrilled that we were able to go over it today.
My pleasure.
Well, thank you very much for your time with us. We really appreciate it. We had fun too.
Thanks so much to Drs. Pringsheim and Martino. That was so interesting, and I appreciate that they shared their observations with us. I'll link to their work in the show notes with this episode at tourettespodcast.com. There is more science ahead on Tourette's Podcast. Again, I think that's a good idea for the Tourette community to become familiar with the pertinent science community. Know the names, know what they're working on. The scientists I get to work with are all about patient-centered outcomes, working with the community. It's not all about eradicating Tourette syndrome or anything like that. It's about us getting to live the lives that we want to live and have the tools to do so. So we can do this together, not just be siloed. That's exciting to me. More ahead. Tourette Awareness Month continues on Tourette's Podcast. Thank you for what you're doing to help the world get a new impression of what Tourette syndrome is. The hope is that the more we do this, the better odds that in the future, someone's first impression of Tourette is going to come directly from someone with the disorder, or at least educated about it in a positive way, so that becomes the dominant first impression versus the worn-out comedy routine or the caricature of Tourette syndrome. Tourette.org for more Awareness Month ideas and materials. Thanks also to Geeks Rising, the network this podcast is part of, for posting a great awareness banner at geeksrising.com, where you can find all the past episodes of Tourette's Podcast and other podcasts about life, nature, technology, gaming, pop culture. geeksrising.com. Keep in touch. tourettespodcast.com has a contact form. There's also tourettespodcast@gmail.com. We're on Twitter, Instagram. There's the Facebook group. You can give individual support at patreon.com/tourettespodcast. And if you do contribute, let me know if I can name you on the show. You'll get a title of executive producer. Okay, we'll be back next week. Thanks for listening. This is Ben.